I have been keeping a little bit of a secret for the past few months, and I'm finally ready to share that I'm pregnant. So I'm currently 13 weeks at the time of recording this. I think by the time I post it, I'll probably be 14 weeks, but I don't have much of a baby bump. I can show if you want. It's not very noticeable at all. I mean, like for me, I can definitely tell there's a difference because the lower part of my abdomen bulges out a lot more than it used to, but I'm still waiting for the bump. Really excited to start actually seeing that there's a baby in there. It does very much feel every time I go out about my day that like I'm carrying this secret that nobody else really knows and that it's really special. But I thought in this video I would just chat a little bit about what the transition to pregnancy has been like and just like some reflections on it because it's a really, really special time in a woman's life. And if you've ever been pregnant, maybe you can relate to some of these, or if you would like to be pregnant one day, maybe this will be interesting to you. So probably the coolest thing about getting pregnant is that both my husband and I unconsciously knew before we actually knew consciously. So a few days before I took a pregnancy test, my husband told me that he had a dream that he found a positive pregnancy test in the bathroom and that he came and asked me about it. And in the dream, I had said, "Look again," and he looked at it again and there was only one line, meaning I wasn't pregnant, and that he was kind of disappointed about it. And I think this dream really showcased that he was hoping for it to happen, and he kind of already knew that there was a positive line there. Another time I was at a chocolate store and there was a chocolate that had alcohol in it, some sort of like rum or something. I was with my mom and the woman looked at my mom and she said, "This has alcohol, can she have some?" And I don't know, like, what happened. Like, did she think I was younger than I am? Because I looked at my mom and I was like, what, do I look like I'm pregnant or something? Without really knowing that already I was pregnant. And leading up to when we found out about the pregnancy, there was just so much increased talk about future children and what that would look like within our family. And I intuitively knew to stop drinking, even when there were like social pressures or even when like it made sense for me to maybe want to get a drink, like when we were out for dinner. A part of me was just like, no, I don't think you should have that. My body knew even before I took a pregnancy test. And so it was day 33 of my cycle. I was expecting to get my period that day. I was like, okay, by the end of the day, I'm gonna get my period. It kind of feels like I'm going to get my period. And then we were driving home and we came home and I realized no period has come. And immediately I knew. And I was like, oh, I think I know what's happened. And I took a pregnancy test and right away it turned positive. Even as I was unwrapping the test, like before I even peed on it, I knew that it was going to be positive. And in that minute or two in between me finding out and calling Nikolai, my husband, to see that it was positive, it was just like my little secret. And I loved it so much because I had this amazing news to share with him, but he didn't know what it was yet. It's kind of like anytime you have a surprise for someone, like maybe a special present for their birthday, or like you want to surprise them with a trip, a surprise birthday party, whatever it is, you know that it's going to bring them so much joy. And there's something so special about the fact that right now it's your little secret. It's like an act of self-intimacy almost. Now, telling people was also super exciting to make those announcements. And again, just such an easy way to bring joy to people. I feel like I've never had such an easy time making people happy before. And people have pretty much all of them, with very, very few exceptions, been so incredibly sweet. Just like checking in on me constantly, congratulating me, like asking me about the doctor's appointment before I've even had the doctor's appointment. You know, like just the fact that they remembered that I had a doctor's appointment that week, asking me how I feel. I don't think there's ever been a time in my life when people have been as kind to me as when I'm pregnant. And on one hand, it's like, wow, I feel so incredibly loved. And on the other hand, it's kind of like, well, I kind of wish that we treated each other this way, even regardless of pregnancy. You know, I wish that people were this kind to each other, whether or not they had another little soul growing in them. But pregnancy, I think, also makes it super, super clear who cares about you and who doesn't. Because you can tell a lot about people from how they react to the news, from whether they check in on you. I mean, pregnancy is, they say, like the most vulnerable time in a woman's life. And I feel like you don't really know this until you've gone through it or until somebody that you love has gone through it. But once you're familiar with pregnancy, you realize, my God, there are so many things that could go wrong. You could get gestational diabetes. You could get preeclampsia. The baby might not be growing at the rate that he should be. Could have some sort of chromosomal issue. Could have a neural tube defect because you weren't taking folate enough before you got pregnant. There's always the fear of miscarriage, especially in the first trimester. People get morning sickness and food aversions and food cravings and fatigue and all these sorts of things. I have been mostly very, very blessed with symptoms. I only really had food aversions where basically any food of nutritional value was disgusting to me and I couldn't bring myself to think of anything I wanted to eat. But luckily that's pretty much faded by now, since I'm just at the end of the first trimester. And other than that, really, it's been wonderful. I haven't had any other symptoms. I don't have any symptoms right now. I feel perfectly energetic. I feel just normal. But my point is that that's not the case for everybody. And given that if a police officer has a pregnant wife, the wife is more likely to die during pregnancy than the police officer is likely to die at work. So it's a really, really fragile time in a person's life, and you can learn a lot about who cares about you and who basically doesn't care if you're alive or dead. Now, like I said, I've been pretty blessed with not really having any symptoms. I haven't had any morning sickness or anything other than food aversions for a few weeks. And the food aversions, they were a little bit annoying because that's not really how I was planning on nourishing my body and my baby during pregnancy. I had this whole plan about I was going to eat super healthy whole foods and make myself all these healthy snacks and stuff. I had made myself sweet potato chips the week that I found out. And then the next week I realized I can only have croutons. But what can you do? This is the nature of having those hormonal changes. And I just tried to remind myself that almost all women go through this when they're pregnant because of the hormonal changes, and their babies are perfectly healthy and happy and fine in many cases. Now, one thing that didn't quite sit right with me during pregnancy is just how much pressure I feel there is on pregnant women to be secretive because of these superstitions and because of this fear-mongering of if you tell people too soon, you're going to cause a miscarriage. Or at the very least, oh, that's going to be awkward if you then have a miscarriage. And the thing is, yes, the earlier on in the pregnancy you are, the more likely of having a miscarriage you are. But there's never a safe time in pregnancy. Like I said, it's always going to be very touch and go, and things can happen at any phase throughout the pregnancy. And sometimes I feel this pressure on women to not tell people about their pregnancy in case they have a miscarriage is just that people don't want to hear about it if they end up being in grief. And look, I understand if you tell your mailman, oh, I just found out that I'm pregnant, and then something happens and the mailman asks you about it. It's going to be a little bit strange to say, actually, I had this traumatic loss to somebody that you don't know well. But family, friends, it seems you would want their support if something does happen. So although I held off and I didn't publicly announce the pregnancy until 13 weeks, it just didn't sit right with me because it's if something happens, I'm expected to sit here and mourn in silence. People only want to hear about it if it's good news. They don't want to support me if I'm going through something traumatic. And also what made the topic of miscarriage kind of complicated for me was that I had been working on a novel in which the protagonist has a stillbirth. And I think I started writing this novel in part because I knew I was preparing for this transition in my life. And I know people who have experienced miscarriages, very traumatic, upsetting miscarriages. As a person with a history of illness anxiety, that's always going to be on the forefront of my mind during pregnancy. And so I needed to work through that complex. And I found out I was pregnant when I still had a few weeks of the novel to write. So those were a little bit awkward because I was sitting there writing about a woman who feared having another miscarriage and who had experienced this traumatic loss related to a stillbirth, while I myself was very early on pregnant. It's not exactly a fun thing that you want to talk about, but I'm glad I pushed through and did it because it showed I wasn't avoiding my fears. I was, again, working through them through an art form. Another way that my history of illness anxiety impacted this experience is that I have always had, since adolescence, this core belief about myself that I would be infertile for some reason because of things that were told to me growing up, because I had an eating disorder for 10 years. This was something that I feared. And so I was obviously very elated to discover that that wasn't the case and that actually I got pregnant earlier than I had planned to, because our plan had been to start trying, or not trying, but just like not trying to prevent in February. I think it can be a really anxiety-provoking time if you have a history of illness anxiety and also a history of an eating disorder. I mean, I'm very, very relieved that I'm fully recovered, because whatever changes my body goes through, it just kind of feels like, this is for the baby. I want a healthy baby, so it is what it is. And also, it's kind of impermanent, like if you put on baby weight, like I have a lot of faith in my natural diet and routine's ability to bring me back to equilibrium, to bring me back to exactly where my homeostasis is. So I'm not really worried about it. And I do think it's a little bit concerning if you get pregnant and you're not fully recovered, because there are certain things about making sure that your pregnancy is healthy that I think are a little bit incompatible with being in active recovery. So for example, I use this app that tells me like what size my baby is, any changes that might be coming up that week. And this app had given me this article about how, if you have a history of an eating disorder, you can ask your OB to not weigh you. And I'm just like, that doesn't seem right. Like if you're not in a place where you can be weighed to determine that your baby is growing the way that they should be, that seems like it could be a problem. And this is no judgment to women who maybe found out they were pregnant and weren't fully recovered. But I think if you're actively planning on getting pregnant and you're not fully recovered, that might be a little bit of a cause for concern. Because when you're pregnant, your triggers, I think, are not more important than the health of the life that you're bringing into this world. So you really need to have a grasp on those triggers. Now, one thing that's like a little annoying about my history is that some people in my life seemed kind of worried about like, if I would relapse, or if the changes happening in my body would be distressing for me, or if I would restrict during pregnancy. Like I had some questions about whether my food aversions were real or whether they were psychological. And it's like, no, they're very much caused by hormonal changes. It's a real phenomenon. You can find yourself online. Rest assured, I would not put my baby at risk because of my own body image issues. And honestly, I've never felt more beautiful as when I'm pregnant, to tell you the truth. Something else is that I now have basically zero tolerance for other people's bullshit and for drama. Because obviously stress is not good for the baby. It just kind of puts everything into perspective. So like, I don't check comments at all anymore, pretty much, on my psychology page. Because people commenting those things are not real to me. Like, they're not people in my real life. They're not people I see about my day. They're not people I interact with who I actually know. So why would I give them the power to stress me out and to say awful things to me and to upset me? They're not real to me. This baby is. My family is now my number one priority. And anytime somebody brings stress into my life during pregnancy, I take a real issue with that. I might have been okay with handling that stress when it concerned just me, but when it concerns the well-being of my unborn child, that is not something I'm going to tolerate. And I have noticed that I've been a lot more assertive and confrontational since finding out I'm pregnant. Kind of like this protective mama bear energy. And this is something that I've been working on for years leading up to this point, but now it's finally being put into motion. And honestly, if I can say something, I feel like pregnancy attracts a whole lot of both positive and negative attention, like spiritually speaking. Like before even people find out about the pregnancy, I've found that there has been such an increase in people trying to bring chaos to my life. And I looked this up online. I couldn't find anything about this phenomenon, about like pregnancy attracting more positive and negative attention from people. So if this is something that you have any experience with, I would love to hear about that in the comments. And actually, if any of you have like follow-up questions or like things you want to share about pregnancy in the comments, I might do like a follow-up video on this and include like maybe like a bit of a Q&A, because it's been a while since I've done a Q&A. Something else that I'm no longer allowing from people is to be infantilized because of how I look. I'm 27 years old, closer to 28 at this point. I'm a doctor, an author, a wife, and soon to be a mother. So when I occasionally hear people infantilizing me, whether it's in real life or online, it's at the point where it's literally laughable to me. Because it's like, okay, I understand I look young, but I'm literally a fucking adult, okay? Like, I am adult in every sense of the word. I'm soon to be a mother. You're not gonna infantilize me. I'm not a child. I'm not a little girl. I don't care how I look. I'm a grown-ass woman. And it reminds me of how both my mom and my aunt, when they got pregnant at like perfectly normal ages, I think similar to the age I'm at, were disrespected by people who accused them of being teen moms. I mean, look, if you assume that somebody's a teen mom and they're a grown-ass woman nearing 30 years old, that is a you problem, my friend. In terms of things I had to give up for pregnancy, like alcohol, raw seafood, unpasteurized dairy, honestly, giving up alcohol was not a problem. I don't think about it ever. I don't really miss it ever. Raw seafood was much harder. Oh my God. I so crave sushi, a poke bowl, just like slices of raw salmon, oysters. Oh my God, when I smell oysters and the briny scent of it, it just gives me so much FOMO. Unpasteurized dairy can also be annoying sometimes because in Europe, apparently when you go out and about, most dairy is unpasteurized for some reason. So we were traveling one time and we were trying to find like a place to have lunch. I had food aversion, so everything was looking gross to me. And finally we found this pizza parlor and I was so excited to sit down and have a slice of margarita pizza. And when I was ordering, I said, oh, and just to check, like it's pasteurized, right? And the waiter said, no, none of the cheeses on our menu are pasteurized. So that was disappointing. Yeah, the food stuff that I can't have is definitely a lot harder than giving up alcohol. And skincare too, there are just so many ingredients that you can't use anymore. There were some that I knew from before I got pregnant that I would need to not be using, like tretinoin, but there were others like salicylic acid that I was not aware of. And lastly, I think even before I got pregnant, I really set the intention for myself that pregnancy and delivery is going to be smooth and for the most part painless or just not that bad. And I think I'm so confident about this because I've been through a lot of pain and anxiety in my life. And I've learned a lot of tools to deal with those hardships when they come up. And I think sometimes when people are really struggling with pregnancy, not always, but in some cases, it's because they haven't really ever experienced something of that caliber before, that they don't necessarily have the tools to deal with the increase in anxiety or the depression that could come after or during pregnancy. But for me, it's like, I have very much experienced a lot of adversity in my life. I don't always talk about it on YouTube because that's personal, but I feel very confident in my ability to use the resources at my disposal. And also I feel pretty confident that it's just not going to be that bad. Compared to the stuff I've been through, it's not that big of a deal. And I think also what helped me cultivate this attitude of like pregnancy is going to go perfectly smoothly for me is that I've always been a woman who is blessed to not have like any sort of menstrual pain. I just always feel like I'm out of the loop with a lot of women's reproductive experiences because for me it's like I don't really notice a difference over the course of my menstrual cycle and I don't experience menstrual cramping. And I've been very blessed in that regard, and I was hoping, and it looks like it's going to be the case, that that also translates to pregnancy. But I think part of it is also the mindset that you go into it with. You know, if you hear a lot of really negative stories about how pregnancy sucks, delivery sucks, having a baby is going to be so hard and you're going to be so tired and all that. If you're going into it with the mindset of this is going to be so incredibly difficult for me, you might actually make it a little harder than it needs to be. That's not to say that women don't experience a lot of hardship during pregnancy. Like I said, it's an extremely vulnerable time in a woman's life, and having kids is also obviously very challenging and completely changes the way that life looks for you. But I think sometimes people lead so much with the negative that it becomes this narrative that we tell ourselves as a society. And frankly, I don't accept that narrative. But yeah, those were my reflections on the transition to pregnancy. I will keep you posted as things move forward. I really do feel like I'm kind of an open book on this channel in terms of talking through reflections of like different things I'm going through personally. So I hope that this was helpful to at least some of you. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.